My first instrument was the alto saxophone. My father got me one when I was 6. And that's pretty early to start on the saxophone. Most kids start when they're 9 or 10. But my dad had a saxophone around the house, and when I was a little kid, he would break it out once in a while and play it. And he was never really a great saxophonist, but he started on the instrument when he was young and went into songwriting later on, but always had a saxophone around, so I kind of loved the look of it and the sound of it, and I was interested in having one of my own. So he got me one after a lot of begging when I was 6. That's a good question. I came up playing music in school, and I came up playing in the normal school concert bands and jazz bands that many kids come up playing in. I look back and I think of all the times where I was exposed to music as just a fan of music. There's always music playing in the house. There's always something on the radio. We went to a concert. I remember being 7 years old. I just remember the names. I remember the music, but Ella Fitzgerald and Oscar Peterson played a concert close to where I grew up in Connecticut. I remember going to that as a little kid. I don't remember the music because I was too busy running around with my siblings. But I did study music in high school, formally and informally. I studied with Jackie McLean, and he's one of the true masters of this music. And the way that he taught was a lot by ear, listening to records, listening to solos, singing them, playing them on your instrument, being able to take them and play them through the keys. But it was also a formal aspect to it too, scales and patterns and things like this. So I studied with him and got both sides of formal and informal training, which is what most great artists in this music have. You have the formal training, the reliance upon kind of the European conservatory model of teaching with lessons and method books and things like that, studying harmony and counterpoint and all that, and also playing and listening and participating, learn by looking, learn by doing, learn by getting up on a bandstand and sitting in with someone and not knowing the tune and have to figure it out by ear. All those processes, listening to records, learning off of records without having anything written down. I think those are all important ways of learning, and I was fortunate to have people, Jackie McLean, Dave Santoro, Steve Davis, who's playing on the other stage now, was an early teacher of mine as well, and many, many others. My first paying gig was when I was 16 years old. It was at a place in Hartford, Connecticut, where I grew up, called Arch Street Tavern. I put together a band, quintet, and the trumpet player couldn't make it, so it ended up being a quartet, which, the first paying gig I ever played was as a quartet, saxophone quartet, and I just got off the stage here at Newport Jazz Festival playing in my saxophone-led quartet, so it's kind of full circle in a way. But yeah, I was 16 and I played opposite some buddies of mine who had a quintet of their own. So it was my quartet and their quintet playing together at Arch Street Tavern in 1991 in Hartford, Connecticut. Yeah.
How much?
Wow, I think we played for the Door that first gig. I don't remember how much we got paid, but for me, at that time, it wasn't even about the money. It was about playing for an audience of people and getting that kind of feedback from an audience and kind of learning how to create a set and how to communicate with the musicians on the stage and communicate with the audience too. It's much more of a learning experience. It wasn't very much though. I can't imagine we got paid more than 30 or 40 bucks each, something like that. It influences a lot. I've been studying how West African cultures pass music on from generation to generation. And there's a lot of overlap in how the music has been passed on here in America, in the jazz community. So, for example, Jackie McLean, I spoke about him earlier, he grew up in Sugar Hill, Harlem, around, Sonny Rollins was his neighbor, Bud Powell was his neighbor, Duke Ellington, and all these amazing musicians lived in Sugar Hill at the time. He tells stories about going over to Bud Powell's house and playing with him and playing by ear, listening to Bud's lines and really capturing the spirit of what Bud was doing. and learning what he was doing by ear. So I think that's super important. The West African tradition of learning by doing, learning by listening, learning by being around masters, and learning from those masters, I think is super important. I also think it's important to learn how to read music, to learn how to write music, to learn how to arrange music, and those things you learn in more of a kind of, I mentioned European conservatory model. That's more of how you learn that model. I think I try to do both because I think both are really important in getting the best possible improvising musician. Well, I think there are situations these days where older musicians will hire younger musicians in their bands and mentor them. Gone are the days of the Art Blakey jazz messengers and Horace Silver and Betty Carter and musicians who made a practice of that, and musicians at the highest levels made a practice of always hiring younger musicians. But there are those opportunities. And for the young musician who really wants to learn how to play, you have to seek those out. You have to always look for musicians who are masterful at what they do and learn by being around them, There's a lot of jam sessions you can go to. Most of those jam sessions are populated by your peers, if you're a young player. But every once in a while, I know musicians like Roy Hargrove loves to go to jam sessions. So you might just go to your regular jam session and play with a bunch of folks your age if you're a young person in your early 20s, whatever, and then Roy Hargrove might walk through the door. And now you have a chance to be around a masterful musician and get that kind of apprenticeship just by watching him and listening to him and hearing what he does. So those opportunities are still around. I think it's a responsibility of younger players to try to seek them out as much as possible. Hi, I'm Jimmy Greene.